Snowflakes drifted like whispers between the crumbling facades of a city still stitching itself together after war. Berlin, scarred, halved, and patrolled, wore its past like a coat it couldn't take off. On one side of the wall, neon signs flickered with capitalist charm. On the other, silence lingered beneath the weight of uniformed stares. But in the university quarter, where minds tried to rise above politics, a quiet miracle stirred. Evie Hart stood by herself in a drafty lecture hall, notebook pressed to her chest, her breath fogging the glass as she stared out at a skyline divided by ideology. At 21, she was the youngest student on the American Talent Exchange. Science had been her ticket here. But music was her compass. Her cassette recorder slept in her bag, humming with melodies scribbled on napkins and margins. She wasn't expecting anything more than lectures, accents, and cold hands. Then he walked in. The man who stepped to the podium was tall, lean, with a sharpness about him, like a scalpel. His coat was worn, his hair neatly combed, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd looked too long at the stars and too little at people. "My name," he said slowly, "is Dr. Nikolai Antonov. I come from Moscow." His voice was low, precise. Russian syllables softened for foreign ears. Evie's hand stopped moving. Something in her chest stirred. The lecture was about wireless electricity, a radical theory that energy could leap invisibly across airwaves like music through a radio. It wasn't about weapons or war or empire. It was about freeing people from cords and scarcity. It was about light. When the talk ended and the hall thinned out, Evie didn't think. She walked to the front. "You're Dr. Antonov?" she asked, her voice louder than she meant. He turned, cautious. I'm Evie Hart. I just wanted to say, that was incredible." A pause. "You understand it?" he asked, almost amused. "Not all of it," she admitted, "but enough to know it's important." He smiled, barely. "Then we are both students." They saw each other again the next afternoon, accidentally at first, or so they told themselves. The second time was at a cafe near the Tiergarten, where she sat writing lyrics on napkins. He ordered strong coffee, no sugar, and asked her why she didn't study music instead of science. "Because," she said, "music keeps me dreaming, but science gets me funded." He laughed quietly. It surprised them both. Over the next few days, their conversations grew deeper, more natural, like a melody being rehearsed between heartbeats. Nikolai spoke with precise words and long silences, as if every answer needed its own trial. He told her about his parents, both gone before he turned 20, about the government interest in his research, more than he ever wanted. "They want to build walls with it," he said once, voice low. "I want to build bridges." And then, one snowy evening, he told her about Tatiana. "My sister, younger by 5 years, a journalist. She believes in freedom the way some believe in saints. She writes about corruption, injustice. Too loud, too fearless." "You worry for her?" Evie asked. "Every day." "And Evie?" She told him how she composed songs in physics class, how she loved Debussy and dust storms, how she feared waking up one day in a life that wasn't hers. "I envy you," Nikolai said. "Me?" "You feel, loudly, without apology. I was taught to bury feeling, or worse, report it." She reached across the table, fingertips brushing his. "Maybe you need someone to remind you how to feel again?" He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. Time in Berlin was slippery, both slow and vanishing. On the final morning, snow blanketed everything in white silence. Evie's suitcase sat by the door. Her cassette recorder was packed. but her heart felt heavy, like a song left unfinished. She met Nikolai at the train station. He wore the same coat, his eyes darker than usual. "I suppose," he said, "this is goodbye." "No," she said. "This is—" She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded page. "It's a song? I never finished it. I don't know why." He took it carefully, holding it like a fragile thing. "I will finish it," he said softly. "Someday." "Promise me," she said, voice trembling. "You won't let them use you." "I can't promise that," he replied. "But I can promise this. I will never forget you." She leaned in, kissed him once, gently, like a bookmark pressed between pages. They parted with no goodbye. Just the sound of train whistles and breathless silence. The spring light of California had a strange way of making shadows sharper. Evie had only been back for a few days, but already the air felt too warm, the skies too wide. Everything here was easy, too easy. No soldiers on corners, no whispers behind curtains. But it wasn't freedom she felt. It was distance. From him. She hadn't spoken of Nikolai to anyone. Not yet. But David knew. He found her one afternoon tucked away in the campus library, her head bent over blueprints, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing equations Nikolai had once described in the softest Russian-accented English. "Evie," David said, sliding into the chair across from her. He looked older somehow, creased not by age, but by knowledge. She barely glanced up. "Don't start." "I'm not here to argue," he said gently. "Just to warn you." She froze. Her pencil hovered. "Warn me? About Antonov?" Now she looked at him. "David, don't." "I know what happened in Berlin, who you met, what he's working on." Evie's eyes narrowed. "He's trying to give the world something good." David's voice hardened. "He's trying to give the world something dangerous. Do you really think the Soviets would let him out of the country to speak at a university without strings attached? You think he's using me? I think you don't know how this game is played." Evie stood up abruptly, her voice barely steady. "You're not saying this because of Nikolai. You're saying it because of me, because I don't feel the way you want me to." David looked away. "That's not true." "Yes, it is," she whispered. "You've always wanted to protect me, but this isn't protection, David. This is control." He lowered his voice. "Evie, I'm trying to keep you from being used. That's not jealousy. That's loyalty." "No," she said softly. "That's pity disguised as patriotism." For a long moment, they stared at one another. Two old friends now standing on opposite sides of a growing fault line. Neither one moved. Neither one blinked. When she walked away, she didn't look back. And David didn't follow. When Nikolai returned to Moscow, it was to a different kind of winter. One where the cold came not from snow, but from silence. His apartment had been searched. His mail censored. His colleagues turned distant, eyes flickering toward shadows before they spoke. Even Tatiana was quieter, more watchful. One night she whispered, "They're listening." 2 weeks later, she vanished. The official report said she fell from a staircase in a government building. No autopsy, no funeral. Nikolai stood alone in her empty flat, surrounded by notebooks, coffee cups, and drafts of an article never published. Something inside him cracked. When Evie's coded message arrived, warning him that she too was being watched, it was the final ember. "I must go to her," he said aloud. "To no one." He smuggled what he could. Blueprints, notes, memories, and made contact with a border smuggler. A boat waited on the Baltic coast. His fingers trembled as he folded Evie's song into his coat pocket. He whispered the lyrics under his breath as the waves grew darker. Then came floodlights and the sound of boots. The day the storm came, Evie was in a lab surrounded by glowing coils and oscilloscopes, testing the early circuits of what would one day power cities without wires. She was laughing with a colleague over coffee when the phone rang. The voice on the line was cold. Matter of fact. There was a boat, an escape attempt. Her heart stopped. Who? There was a Russian defector. We believe it was your Antonov. There was a storm. The vessel capsized in international waters. No survivors. Evie didn't speak. She couldn't. They said a name, a date, a time. She heard nothing but the echo of his voice in her memory. I will finish it there, with you. She dropped the phone. The weeks that followed blurred like spilled ink. Her room was filled with his notes, his sketches, his song. She slept on his designs. She ate next to his handwriting. She barely spoke. When she finally emerged, she did so with fire. She tore through theories like storms tear through harbors. She ignored warnings, worked through holidays, forgot birthdays. Where others saw madness, she saw memory. He gave me the dream, she once told a colleague. The least I can do is finish it. No memorials, no gravestone. Only the glowing coils and humming air of the Antonov line. She never wrote music again, but in quiet moments, she'd still hum his song. The years had softened the world, but not its wounds. Evie stepped onto Russian soil like someone crossing into a memory. There were no more walls, no more barbed wire, only echoes. She was part of a scientific delegation now, touring old institutes and orphaned labs. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a school in a small town near the Ural foothills. The classroom smelled of chalk and coal smoke. Children in second-hand uniforms sat in neat rows, their eyes wide with curiosity. She spoke of science and dreams, of electricity without wires, of ideas once considered mad and now made real. When she finished, a small boy in the front row raised his hand. "Do you want to hear a song?" he asked. She smiled. "I'd love to." He stood and sang with a shy pride in clear but accented English. Between two shores, a song remains. In silence kept through fire and chains. Evie stopped breathing. Her hands gripped the sides of the podium. Where did you learn that?" she asked, her voice cracking. The boy tilted his head. "My grandfather sings it every night, says it's the only song that matters." Her eyes blurred with tears. "What is your grandfather's name?" The boy grinned. "Nikolai." She didn't wait for the applause. She ran. The cottage was small, built of fading wood and silence. A stray breeze knocked snow from the roof as the boy led her up the path. Inside, a fire crackled faintly. An old man sat hunched beside it, his hands wrapped around a chipped porcelain mug. He stared at the flames as if trying to remember something he was never allowed to forget. Evie stood frozen in the doorway. "Nikolai?" He turned slowly, blinking through disbelief. His voice was barely a breath. "Evie?" She dropped her coat. Her hands shook. He stood, slowly, stiffly, like someone unsure if the floor beneath him was real. "You finished the song," he whispered. "They told me you died." "I did," he said. "For 28 years, I was dead. But your song was the one thing that lived inside me." She reached out and took his hand. "I thought I lost you." I was lost, he said. But your voice, it never stopped singing in my head. Every night, every storm, every cell, it kept me alive. They didn't speak for a while after that. They didn't need to. The silence between them was sacred. They didn't fall into each other like lovers from old films. Their reunion wasn't fireworks. It was the flicker of a pilot light, long extinguished, somehow sparked again. Nikolai never regained the years stolen from him. Evie never forgot the ache of waiting. But together, they built something different. Not a life of what-ifs, but a bond tempered by time, suffering, and truth. When they spoke in conferences years later, people praised their scientific legacy. Few knew the real engine behind it, a song written in Berlin, unfinished, carried across decades, and completed not in notes, but in survival. They had been separated by oceans, borders, ideologies, and lies. But in the end, the only thing that endured was love.